Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our second of 5 sessions on conscious leadership and how in our world today we can be aware of the context for leadership and evolve our capacities and our faculties so that we can become more conscious of the kind of choices that we need to make and the kind of leadership that we need to provide. Yesterday, I began our program with reference to Jeffrey Sachs, the economist from Columbia University, who in a recent speech addressed the issue of leadership in a very insightful way. He pointed out that there are 3 major transformations that are taking place simultaneously in our world. One is the geostrategic transformation between U.S. supremacy to a multipolar world in which the United States, as we're seeing in the Middle East and also in Ukraine, is being increasingly marginalized as other nations and other coalitions of nations are emerging with a capacity to assert themselves independent of U.S. will. And we're particularly seeing that in Ukraine and in the Middle East. We're now moving, after a century of U.S. supremacy and primacy, into a multipolar world. And we're moving, as Jeffrey Sachs indicates, from a Euro-North American-centric world into a world that is now increasingly dominated by Asia and the global South, which is now becoming the global majority. The second major transformation is the transformation in technology. Quite literally, every aspect of human society, and also epistemology, philosophy, sociology, is being radically reframed by the accelerating advance of technology. The latest manifestation of which is artificial intelligence. And we're now in a world where silicon intelligence is equal to, and in many cases surpassing, carbon intelligence. And Yuval Harari, the great Israeli commentator and the author of Sapiens and Homo Deus and the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, has said that in this generation, humanity's projection of intelligence from biology to machines is the most fundamental transformation in the history of humankind. So that is causing fundamental realignments in not only who we are, but what we know and how we know. And the third major transformation is the accelerating and radically destructive climate change, which, because of global warming since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but most importantly in the last 50 years, is now destabilizing the entire planetary ecology in ways that are shaking the foundations of civilization itself. Extreme weather events used to be rarities, and now they are commonplace, and they're escalating year by year with no end in sight. So if you take these 3 transformations together, geostrategic, as we move into a multipolar world, technological, as we move into the world of AI and transformations of computer technology, and then ecological transformations due to climate change. You have an assault on every category, including leadership, that has been known to the human family. And we're quite literally in a moment where not only everything that we know is being radically transformed, but everything that we are in terms of human identity itself is being radically reformulated. So how we understand that and how we process this literal assault of transformation, information, possibility, and destructiveness that is now apparent to all of us around the world, and then how we begin the process of exerting leadership in this complexity, which is now becoming hyper-complexity, is not so easy to fathom because what we don't know is now outstripping what we do know. And therefore, I think on the part of many people, according to the polls, anxieties, depressions, psychic paralysis is increasingly becoming the norm. And so our conversation this week about what conscious leadership even means, much less how we can access it in a way ultimately that can actually make a difference in the world, is one of the most consequential dialogues that we've had for some time on Humanity Rising, as we continue to probe week by week and day by day the issues that are confronting humanity at this most extraordinary moment in our evolutionary development. So that's the context for today. And within this spirit, I'd like to welcome my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who's been the convener of this week. Tom, you've taken on a daunting task talking about conscious leadership, and I turn the program now over to you.
Well, thank you, Jim, and as always, thank you for your opening remarks. They're always quite remarkable, and you do a wonderful job of setting the stage and the frame for us to be thinking about the dialogue we're about to engage in. I want to welcome my dear friend and colleague, Sean Mitchell, who, as I mentioned in yesterday's program, we spent the last 4 months or so trying to put together this program. And while the focus is on conscious leadership, we're using Joseph Campbell's story and way of thinking about the human journey, the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, to think through where we are. Today's conversation is focused on the departure. And for those of you who weren't able to join us yesterday, we would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to yesterday's comments, where we were delighted to be joined by Richard Olivier and Jude Curvon, where we talked about human evolution. We talked about the archetypes. We talked about cosmology, and there were some quite provocative ideas that were put out there for us to be thinking about regarding where are we as a species, where are we in this evolutionary path. And so I'll just turn it over to Sean for a moment to welcome us, and then we'll get into the conversation, starting with Dr. Heather Shea. You'll have to take your device off mute, Sean.
Oops. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tom and Jim, and welcome everyone. This is such an interesting and fun topic to me, and I'm really delighted that we have these extraordinary panelists with us yesterday, today, and for the rest of the week as well. And when Tom and I were putting this together, how did we want to create an arc to a week? And we thought, well, let's do something along a template, if you will, of the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And about that time, I was reading Jean Houston's book, The Wizard of Us, which is, I guess you could call it a play off of Dorothy as the heroine of her, The Wizard of Oz. And so I'm really thrilled to have Jude back and Heather, who's quite an expert, I would say, on the heroine's journey, not only living it herself, but in terms of being an expert in discussing it. So I'm going to tee Heather up here and have her start us off on a day. I think it's going to be wonderful today. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Sean. Hi, Tom. And hello to everyone. And thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. And it was fun when Sean called me again a couple months ago saying, let's do something on the hero's journey. And it's one of my favorite topics as we get into the hero and the heroine and the history of it all. So I'm just going to say hello, introduce myself. We'll go over to Jude and then come back again. And I'll do a little more ground setting of what the hero's journey is. Many of you probably could be here teaching it yourself, but we want to put a framework since it's going to be how we're going to look at the rest of the week. Just a little bit of background. I'm an executive intuitive coach, and by intuitive, I work with people to develop their superpowers. And Jude and I are going to be looking at that later on today in terms of how do you access your superpowers and how do you work with archetypes and mythical creatures and other entities and other knowings that you already have inside of you and around you. So we'll be looking at that. I am also an animal communicator. So you may see Nemo, my cat, from time to time. And what I think is interesting about artificial intelligence is that there's studies now, we can talk to whales using artificial intelligence. Well, we can talk to whales. And as we're looking at this whole phenomena of what's happening in climate, as we're looking at what's happening to humanity, it's important also to look at all the creatures that are with us on this planet and beyond. So thank you, and Jude.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you on day 2 after sharing the beginning of this journey together yesterday. And it's wonderful, as always, to be with my dear friend, Heather. As Heather mentioned, we're going to be sharing today, perhaps a very broad base, what a departure can mean, because really a departure is moving on from what we have known. And I would like to set the scene of our departure as both heroes and heroines, and also including the we space of the weirdo's journey as well, that we're departing potentially as conscious leaders and as part of our evolutionary potential to depart from a worldview, an old paradigm that has actually outlived its usefulness. And that's a paradigm of materialism and separation. And so I'd like to come back to this just in a moment before passing back to Heather, and then we'll do a tag team on this for a little while before opening the dialogue. But because we now, and we were speaking about this yesterday, there is a rapidly accelerating and ever more compelling convergence now between leading edge science at all scales of existence and across many different fields of research, and universal wisdom and spiritually based and indigenous wisdom teachings. And that convergence is revealing a universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves from simplicity to complexity, ever greater levels of individuated self-awareness, and does so as a unified entity, which means that our natural heritage is one where we have the superpowers of connectivity with the entire universe. And so the old paradigm of materialist separation had no place for this. It had no place for what Heather and I will share today, multidimensional realities. It had no place for our intuition, our most foundational superpower, in my view. It had no place for the guidance and way showers that are synchronicities. So I'll bring all of those into today, because it seems to me that our journey as potential heroes, heroines, and weirdos all very much enfolds all of this perception into that adventure. And so I'd like to finish before handing back to Heather on 2 points. I think, as Jim always brings deep wisdom and insights into everything that he shares with us, but I do feel that what Jeffrey Sachs spoke of is actually the surface, the waves on top of the surface of the ocean. Yes, geopolitical strategic changes. Yes, technological changes. Yes, not just climate, but overall environmental changes and how we relate to our beloved planetary home Gaia. But what's not said was the deepest change that I perceive of all, which is the potential for our conscious evolution, which I don't think is just evolutionary. I think it's revolutionary. And I think it's a weevolution as well as a revolution. So I really would like to bring that into the heart of what we share today, because that for me could potentially, that's a game changer. Because our worldview is how we see the world, how we experience the world, and the behaviors and choices we make in the world. If we see the world through a collective lens that I often refer to as a collective dis-ease of separation, we behave accordingly. So all of these changes that Jeffrey spoke to, yes, but all of them are based on an old paradigm that is now of itself undergoing an incredibly evolutionary impulse of transformation. And it's that transformation, the transformation in our consciousness, that everything else is a sideshow eventually. I know it sounds big, but this is fundamental. And this is a change, a transformation that as a collective species, we've never undertaken together before. So we talked yesterday about the possibility of the birthing of a new unitive age, where we can step together, link up and lift up, level up, light up together through these incredibly challenging times ahead, but also times of enormous potential, because the evolutionary impulse of our entire universe is flowing through us, just as we are flowing within it. And one final word on the use of the word artificial intelligence. Yesterday, I spoke to this emerging understanding that mind and consciousness aren't what we have. They are literally what we and the whole world are. So in that sense, there is nothing in existence or evolution that is artificial. And so maybe if we realize that the technologies we're speaking about is incredibly good at data, summarizing and synergizing and recognition of patterns, that is a form of intelligence, yes, but it's not emotional intelligence. It's not spiritual intelligence. It's not soul-based connection with the source of all being. And therefore, I would love, if we can wake up to be wiser than we have been, that maybe we can have that wisdom to guide this emergent technology as allied intelligence. Maybe that's part of what we're being faced with now. How wise can we be instead of how clever can we be? And what can we consciously evolve to become? So on that, I'll pass back to Heather to really take us through these next steps.
Thank you, Jude. It was lovely. So we're going to have some fun today. I just want to have us go back and imagine. And like Richard yesterday, whose background is show business or comes from the theater world, so do I. And so we're going to go into a story. And as we're going into our story, there's always the prologue or the setting that once upon a time. So when we go back to what is the hero's journey, from Campbell's point of view, you'd go on an adventure, which is where we are today, this adventure, this calling, learn a lesson, has some sort of transformation and a victory, and returns home transformed. So the stages we're looking at this week, beginning today, the departure, leaving what's familiar. And certainly what we've been talking about at the beginning of the program is we're leaving something that is familiar. We're hearing this calling, and it's something that's bringing us forward. And then there's this refusal of, no. And we're so stuck in who we are and what we are. And yet here we are, the play has begun, and we find ourselves on the stage with everybody else. And now it's showtime. And along the way comes some helpers and teachers. And we look at, and we've already had some comments today about the theater and movies and such. And so if you look at Star Wars, you come along the way and all of a sudden you find Yoda, and you find yourself, you have a teacher. Or Wizard of Oz, Glinda the Witch shows up. And you also find the teachers that you may not want to see as much and find yourself in what Campbell called the belly of the whale. So we're going to look a little bit, because many of us today feel like we are in the belly of the whale. Certainly during the pandemic, it really felt like, oh, what is happening? It's a time of change, transformation, and what am I going to do? So we're going to take a closer look at the archetypes we talked about yesterday, but also looking at other ways to develop our superpowers, embracing and accessing our superpowers. Then comes the initiation, where the hero comes in the unfamiliar world, overcoming obstacles, and again, working with guides, superpowers, selves, other allies. Perhaps you find a scarecrow, a lion, and a tin man, or maybe you bump into Darth Vader. So things happen during the journey, which all create this learning to the return of when you're coming home transformed back to the ordinary world, which is no ordinary world. And as Dorothy was said, there's no place like home. It was with me all the time. So just an overview that it's part of our culture. And we see the hero's journey be in Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Wizard of Oz, Harry Potter, and most recently, the $2 billion blockbuster Barbie. And we will come back to Barbie. Who knew Barbie was an archetype? So going back, and just briefly, in 1949, Joseph Campbell popularized the term hero's journey after studying 240 key stories all over the world. And he described it that leaders who have endured the journey have the inner resources and psychological depth needed to take on great challenges because they have been tested by experience. And certainly now we are being tested by experience. It is the unknown, and we're being called in. When asked by a student why the study of women wasn't included in the hero's journey, it is very much the hero's journey, he was perplexed by the question. It is very much a journey developed originally with a male mindset. So let's take a look at, what does hero mean? A hero, a principal character in literary dramatic work, specifically a male character when contrasted with a heroine. A person who is admired, idolized for courage, outstanding achievement, brave man, man of courage, man of the hour. So again, very much a male focus. When we look at the heroine, this is also from the dictionary, admired, idolized for her courage, outstanding achievement, lovely. Brave woman, woman of courage, star, idol, darling, and diva. Okay, so overall, heroes are more likely to help, save, protect, and make the world a better place. So this is something we're looking at too. Part of the hero or the heroine was the individual going out, going this great quest, and coming back and individually coming back to save the world. Now we're looking more at the collective and looking at that integration. And we'll be looking at that both and. Is it individual or is it the collective? Now this brings me back to Barbie just for a minute, and then we're going to go back to Jude. So from a recent study, 2 out of 3 people who saw the movie were made aware of patriarchy in the workplace. 2 out of 3 of the people, which means a lot of people aren't even aware that patriarchy still exists in the workplace. Now, this is primarily US based, but not necessarily, because it was a global film. 84% of men were less likely to believe that there is a male bias in the workplace, and 77% of women. So it's just as we're going forward, I think it's really important as we're using the term hero's journey or heroine's journey. It really is, we are talking about now is the integration. And when we look at Richard's overview of the archetypes, as we look at the archetypes today, it is bringing both forward. And I just still want to mention that there is something to think about or be aware of. When I recently looked, there are 60,000 books on Amazon. Most of them are written by white males. Which again has a focus. It comes historically of where a lot of our sense of what is a leader. There's a bias in a background. A survey came out October, which has some good information that since 2015, the number of women in the C-suite, and this is in the US and Canada, has gone from 17% to 28%. So we're feeling this. There is an increase of women in leadership. What's still unfortunately, only 1 out of 16 is a woman of color. So there's still a need to expand. 9 in 10 women under the age of 30 want to be promoted to the next level and aspire to senior leadership. So again, there's an insurgence of younger women coming into the marketplace. Originally, when the pandemic happened, people were going, hey, isn't that great? Women are working at home. And women were going, have any of you tried to work at home with children and everything else going on? Let me go back to the workplace. And now what's happened, it's actually could have merged, and men and women are both going, oh, we're working differently. And that's certainly a trend that we could spend more time on, especially as leaders. And so the glass ceiling is becoming more available, but the term now is called a broken rung, is that women are coming up, but they're not getting up the ladder. So some of us have broken through and gotten to the top of the ladder, but the ladder is broken. And the biggest challenge is still microaggressions in the workplace, everyday discriminations and harassment. It seems subtle, it's disrespectful, stressful, and negatively impacts the work environment. There's still an unconscious bias against women in leadership roles. And again, this is not what this program, this is a whole nother week or so. I just think it's important as we're looking at the hero and the heroine, and also conscious leadership. I was looking at, because some of these numbers are domestic, being the US, today, 32% of leaders globally are women, and that's up from 31 in 2016. So it's going up, but there's a lot to go. And as we look at conscious leadership, I will go back to our, Dorothy and the learnings about the hero and the heroine's journey of going back to our hearts, minds, and having courage as we're going forward. So thank you. That's at the end. So or the beginning here, Jude or John. Turn over to you.
Or someplace on the way. Just to respond to that in a few senses, one of the things that I've been working with for a very, very long time is this both men and women, but also the feminine and the masculine. And as a student of ancient Indian wisdom from a very early age, the Vedic tradition speaks of, as does the Chinese tradition, speaks of, in the beginning is the one becomes two, the two, three, and from the three, 10,000 things are born. That's the I Ching. But in the Vedic tradition, there is this oneness, the wholeness of creation that differentiates itself into universal attributes. That's, we talk about the feminine, the masculine, but they're the sort of the active and the receptive. So there's a breathing process at universal levels and at all scales of these complementarities. And there is no separation, but there are these complementarities. And in the ancient traditions, these were seen as being embodied in the most healthful way and whole being way as what was often called the sacred marriage. And realizing that those attributes are profoundly complementary when they're expressed in healthy ways. And there's loads of sort of things such as it takes 2 columns to hold up the sky, it takes 2 wings to fly. But I think we've lost sight of this over a very, very long time. And what you're referring to, or Heather's referring to, are the organizational structures and across all levels of structuring, whether it be education or corporate and all the rest of it. But our organization and social structures are actually pretty much based on 19th century science, a worldview of mechanisms and cogs in the wheel and all the rest of it, and very much hierarchies. And in the industrial apex of the 19th century, those then became the eventual national and then global companies, ways of teaching our children, the sort of healthcare, all the were based on hierarchical structures that themselves were based on what is now realized to be an incorrect, a false understanding of the nature of reality. Now, this is our Western approach. More Eastern approaches and indigenous approaches do not take that hierarchical view. There's much more of a bringing together of everyone's capabilities, everyone's potential and attributes, and both male and female, And also within each of us, whether we're born a man or a woman, the ancient tradition of the Vedic guidance is that there are three aspects. These universal aspects flow through us: the universal feminine, the universal masculine, and the universal child. So it seems to me that when we're talking about men and women and heroines and heroes, there's a deeper understanding here of how, as we go on our journey, we actually, part of that journey and part of that dance and part of that discovery and part of that realization is that we have both and attributes, that we have the ability to be active and receptive. We have the ability to be, understand that the power of our minds and the power of our hearts. And I feel we're in now a journey of integration, where we are integrating potentially. We're not there yet, but I do feel that this increase of women's leaderships, when I was running 2 $500 million turnover companies back in the early 90s, I acted in a very masculine way. Yeah, I could do it. I was part of a hierarchy. I was the top of a hierarchy. I could give orders like you wouldn't believe. I could delegate, yeah, you wouldn't believe. And what I realized through that process before I chose to move on from corporate life is that that wasn't authentically who I am. I was sort of having what Joe Campbell talks about a mask. You know, this idea of a hero with 1,000 masks. My mask was going into a room and people say, "Who are you?" And I'd hand them my business card. That isn't who I am. Never was who I am. But it was the role modeling that I was in service to the good of the whole. So I'd like us to come back to this because it is such a different journey than has been told for so long. As a heroes, as a heroines, as a we heroes, but crucially at this soul level. And also the departure point being a willingness, perhaps an openness through our own inner calling to realize that the worldview that we've been taught at school, that is throughout our structures, is not the true reality of the nature of who we are and our universe is. And that for me is incredibly exciting and inspiring and empowering, because this is an invitation to go on that journey. And for me, that's our potential future as a species, as a planetary species, as a planetary home, as Richard and I were sharing yesterday with our entire solar system. As a matrix of consciousness, this is the most incredible moment in our story and that of our universe, it seems to me. But we need to go deeper, we need to go wider, we need to go bigger. And yet it's intimate because it plays through us. It journeys through us as we journey through its potential, it seems to me. And I'd love us, Heather, I really would love you to share more about, the multidimensionality of this and why that is so key, why naturalizing multidimensional understanding and engagement, communication and guidance is so important, because I know it's been fundamental for your journey as a leader, as a conscious leader, as it has for me. And I really want to hear what Tom and Sean have to say, because I know it's the case for you two as well, what that means to us and why I think all of us feel that this is so incredible an invitation to take this journey together. So back to you, my friend. And back to Tom. Looks like Tom would like to say something too.
Yeah, thank you, Jude, and Heather story. And at the end of and what you're up to in the world, trusting our intuition, so have not used that innate skill that we have. And much of the information that we will need to depart isn't available to us. And Jude, even your comments about what Jeffrey Sachs had reflected, he was missing the cosmological, the evolutionary piece of what's there. So there's a whole lot there that I just threw out, but I'd love to just talk about, we have a clear sense of where we're departing, but where are we going?
Sure.
And how do we how do we prepare ourselves for the journey?
Sure,
I'd
I'll
like to
take that
just-
on. Here we go. Oh, Sean, go ahead. Go ahead. Sean, you
Well, I
had
was just going to share briefly, in my own experience to some degree, and when we talk about how do we write this new story, we know what we're leaving. You know, my own personal story of living in Italy, getting COVID, having to leave Italy, coming back here to the United States and so on. There was so much uncertainty in my life, and I know this is true for almost all of us during that time. So I would sit with myself thinking about the fact that I was living in uncertainty. The story had to be completely rewritten, and I didn't know what it was going to be. And this is where I would tie in to what Heather's going to talk about, is that, well, you know, now I'm talking to the trees, and I'm talking to all kinds of, you could say, angels or inner guidance and celestial beings, and I am opening up myself to the guidance, to the synchronicities, to that deep knowing of a yes when an opportunity or a request comes along, as opposed to in my, say, former sort of businessy life, where for years, of course, we put on the suits and we dress like guys and all that, that I was like, well, yeah, but, and I'd go into the rational kind of trying to figure it out. No, the new story was all about listening from the wisdom, tapping into that, the heart, tapping into that, and definitely was going to be courage, because this was not going to be an easy breezy new story. No, not for any of us on this kind of, if you want to call it, heroine's journey or a deeper path. And that's when I also feel that this is when we get some muscle behind what might be your spiritual practices, so that your alignment with universal wisdom, your alignment with the greater cosmos is a clearer channel. So when you are rewriting this new journey, this new story from uncertainty, is that the path, that yellow brick road, it just unfolds before you. And those mentors, those helpers that are those superpowers that are already within you, the scarecrow, he wants, a brain, he's looking for wisdom. The Tin Woodman, he wants a heart, he's looking for love and compassion. And the lion, who's looking for courage. These are all these things that are those inherent superpowers already within Dorothy, right? And yet she's finding them, they're finding her, and this incredible loyalty and devotion occurs as they all become incorporated together. Well, I'm going to stop and turn this over to Heather now, because thank you for letting me share about that.
That was lovely. Thank you. Thank you all. I think as we're looking at the departure, there is, as we're saying, there's this calling. We're going into the new story. And as we were just talking about, too, we have all this, we're stuck in the old world. We have so much. That's our foundation. It's what we know. And like Sean and Jude, I was a senior executive 30 something years ago with 436 offices around the world. And I've led major corporations, and I'm looking at this model going, oh, that's interesting, and going through this transformation and, going, what is the new story? And believe me, for all of us, that refusal to call is going, I'm going to do what? I've worked with senior leaders and world leaders in 6 continents, and now I'm talking to cats and guinea pigs. And I'm loving it. And I've really watched my new story has become a lot more about the planet and what's happening with the planet. And I'm also I've been teaching women in leadership. And actually, Sean attended one of my programs called Coming to Your Senses, where working with people, and Jude does this as well, to help them understand their own superpowers. Many of you have heard this. We only work with about, 80% being kind, probably 90% of our brain or capacity. When we start working with our consciousness, what we know things. I had this feeling. I knew. I heard this song. It meant something. Something happened and we go, oh, that was significant. So part of it is to go, oh, that's significant, instead of saying, oh, that doesn't mean anything. So I was giggling as I was logging on to Zoom this morning. Literally, this fell off my shelf. And it says, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Lao Tzu. And I think that's really where we are right now. So I went, oh, it fell off my shelf. It must mean something. Now y'all might go, what it means is she bumped into her shelf. But I think the more that we start really listening to and hearing the news story and being open to the news story, which you all are because you are joining us today. And the news story is everywhere. And the refusal of the call is huge because we're so used to something else, but just go with it. I mean, we're talking about stories and movies. Or for those of you, and many of you have probably seen the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's running and he's running and running. And of course, as usual, people are following him and shooting at him. And he gets to the edge of the water and there's no place to go. There's no place to go. He's looking down. He goes into the river. He's going to be dead instantly. There's no place to go. He takes a step and a bridge shows up. And he takes another step and the bridge shows up. And what we know is the bridges are showing up. And so it's having that trust that the bridge is going to show up. The Yoda is going to show up. That mentor is going to show up. That phone call is going to show up. Going forward, moving forward with this worldview and new view of possibilities. And it does take or can take some accessing, if you want to call it spiritual or intuition, the ability, first of all, to go, hey, why not try it? Sometimes when I'm working with people and I'll go, well, what would Yoda do? I mean, it's kind of a funny thing, but, embrace your inner Yoda. Working with people, I'll work if sometimes people are stuck, they're trying to write a book or do something and they're just blocked. And I'll say, well, bring in the goddess Saraswati. She can do anything. She's about flow. And if people just spend, it doesn't have to be very long. It'd be a second, and embrace. And what you'll feel is you'll actually feel this archetypal energy. And the question is it you? Is it them? The answer is yes. That's a whole, again, a longer conversation. But you get charged. And it could be if you want to bring in, Buddha or Jesus, whoever it is for you, or as Richard was talking about yesterday, Archetypes at Work is one of his books, which is fabulous. You can say, oh, we've been doing strategists. We've been in this meeting a long time. Let's go to the storyteller. Let's change roles. I've been in this play and I no longer want to be the villain. I want to be the hero. Or maybe I want to be the clown. So we have the ability to change our roles and reimagine how we show up. And we also have the ability to access, which is kind of the magic, which isn't magical at all. It is the magi. Sometimes I call in Merlin. Sometimes I'm just don't know what I'm doing, what I need. And I'm like, I need a little magic here, or sometimes I can call in the archetype of money. They're all there energetically. So Jude, I'm going to turn it over to you on that.
I like you turning it over to me when money's mentioned, which is...
I could have sent it over on dragons, but
you could have done it. Absolutely. I just wanted to add to that. Oh my goodness, this is so rich and beautiful. What I'm really, let me go back a step. I was asked to contribute a book by Irvin Laszlo and David Lorimer recently. And it's a great book called The Great Upshift. And it's all about our potential for conscious evolution now. But initially, I was asked to write about how I see the future. And I said, I can't write about how I see the future because I can't see the future. And I talked about the turning, as Richard and I shared a little bit about with Sean and Tom yesterday, about the movement from this old age that started just over 2,000 years ago. Sometimes it's called the axial age, sometimes it's called the age of Pisces. But essentially, I wrote about in the contribution for Irvin and David's book that I feel that all the dreamers, all of the transformers, those archetypes, right at the beginning of change, All heroes, heroines in that sense, themselves could not foretell the future. They too had to embody, in a sense, they just had to share what was coming through them, that revelatory understanding of what was coming through them, and trust, because they could not do anything other, of how that might continue to emerge. And it's emerged in the way it has through our collective psyche for the last 2,000 years. And I feel that now, as astrologers would call it, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and as others of us are also calling it the unitive age, that we're moving through into a whole new way of relating with ourselves, each other, our planetary home, Gaia, and literally the whole world. And again, we don't know the future. It seems to me that what you're saying and what we're all saying, and Sean, you just spoke beautifully about this, it is about, for me, it's about attuning and aligning with the evolutionary flow and impulse that's actually flowing through us, and we're flowing on it. It's rather like, a river of consciousness, of universal consciousness, that we can't push and we can't pull, and we can't actually see where that river may go because it's not yet flowed into its future potential. But what we can do is attune and align and flow with it. And I was in Iceland recently, and I was an example of this because I was in email contact with someone who wanted me to do something, like you, Heather, and Sean. It just felt right. And I didn't, he said, whatever you want to do. And I just felt, no, I'm really comfortable. I love the invitation, and just to go with the flow. So it was late at night, and I emailed him back saying, go with the flow. And I got an email back the following morning and saying, I've been going with the flow for so long. I love that you're now saying glow with the flow. And I went, what did I do? What did I do? And clearly what was ever coming through me was changing my typing. And now, and so at breakfast, I shared with the lady sitting next to me. I said, this is so funny. Now, glow with the flow. So she said, can I use that? So I said, of course you can. And I didn't know who she was. It turned out she was a facilitator for the whole session. And I was in a different room at that point. So at lunchtime after the session, people coming for the lunch and going, I'm glowing with the flow. So it's just such a tiny and lovely and humorous example that when we do show up and we do, trust that what's ever flowing through us is indeed doing that, and we're in service to its greater purpose and for the whole, we can all glow with the flow. We don't need to know where the flow is going, as you say. We just need the courage, the bravery of the heart to flow with it. So back to you, or whoever, Sean, Tom. Tom, you're on mute.
Jude, you talk about needing courage to go with the flow, but I think it's actually something more than that. And I'm curious for the three of you, you were all, as was I, working in the world where what was valued was their skull brain. And as a human being, where to be in that place of going or glowing with the flow, it requires a full body yes. It requires the intuitive brain. It requires the emotional brain, the heart. It requires our skull brain, all being in alignment. And I would love for the three of you to speak to, how did you make that transition from your skull brain and that primarily dictating how you were showing up in the world, and departing from that to where you are now and how you're operating in the world?
Well, I can speak a little bit to that, Tom. I mean, oftentimes it does come with suffering, but with a trauma. It can come with a trauma, and a trauma is it can be the smallest thing to one individual and an enormous tragedy to another individual. And whatever is, how's it working for you now, Sean? Well, it's not working for me. So, so in my personal scenario, but this has been going on for a long time, not the trauma part, but I've had a spiritual practice since I had the get-go, and it became more formalized in my 20s. And in my particular case, I would say and this is something I'm very interested in, as you know, is that the more I settle into my spiritual practice, the more frequently I dwell in silence or dwell in presence, if you will, the more glowing with the flow shows up, the more grace shows up, the more inner peace shows up, the more synchronicities show up. So if that's not, a payoff for having some kind of spiritual practice, and I call them spiritual practices, for some people it's running, for some people, it's nature, different kinds of nature, for some people it's inspired writings, and I'm all into the different kinds of things like that too. I really encourage people to get some muscle around aligning their frequency with universal wisdom. And what happens, like I just said a minute ago, all the graces start to show up, and you begin to embody them as well. They don't just show up in your head. They don't just show up in your heart. They don't show up as trust and courage and things of that nature. They show up. It's almost impossible to describe it. I guess that's what I would say, is that as Sean's frequency can be more loving, more peaceful, more present, more available, the world opens up in that glowing with the flow.
And how about for you, Heather?
Yep. A few things. One of my favorite quotes from my theater days was, "Discipline can set you free." And it's really hard work when you're in the belly of the whale, because after all this happens, you say, I'm going to glow with the flow. Life happens. And I think we could all sit here and list all the trauma and tragedies, it's, the good times and the bad of what happens to us as we go through our journey. And you're in the belly of the whale going, oh, not again. And it really is, as one person said to me once, you get out of a swamp one step at a time. And I think this is also a time about learning. And that's why these programs are so important, the continuous learning. And I can't say it was easier, but part of another time, particularly again in this country, it was an easier time. There's nothing easy about this. You are swimming, you are sinking, you are going, you are glowing. And as Sean was just saying, it is a set of skills to begin accessing other vibrations, and I'll use the word dimensions, other capacities. And it is like, if you think of it as a musician, as an athlete, there is a practice to raising your level and ability to function in a new world. And it comes from discipline, and it comes from grace, and it also comes from hope. And also, once you start working in those worlds, it also becomes fun. It begins glowing, as Jude and I know. When Gaia is talking to you, there's an electricity there. And it isn't always easy when you get an archetype knocking on your door saying, hi, let's do this. But it's inspiring to go forward. So, it's a difficult time for all of us, for many of us, obviously these days, much more so. So I do have a privileged life, and I recognize that in saying this. It is a discipline to move forward in creating this collective new world. Jude?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And it is more than courage, I agree. But there's something about it is the bravery of the heart, I feel. It's almost like, for me at any rate, I feel for Sean and Heather too. It wasn't that I said I'd had enough from my head. I said it from my heart. I responded to it from my heart. That I was feeling that, and I loved doing what I was doing until I didn't love what I was doing anymore. And it was progressively not nurturing my soul, not nurturing my deepening sense of who I could be. And I was also getting a real sense, and this is very personal, but I was getting a real sense, because as Heather and I have since we were children, we both walked between worlds. So I was feeling something was coming. And that was, a personal call, but it also really invited that very personal departure. where I walked away from a very money, Heather, when I from a very, very high-powered and very well-paying job, but I knew I had to. There wasn't even oh, this might be a good idea, because I had no idea what it would be. There's a wonderful card in the tarot of the Fool. And the Fool is stepping off. You've talked about Indiana Jones. The Fool's stepping off the cliff with a rose in his hand or her hand, not knowing what that landing was going to be. And that's what I felt when that departure happened. And that's why it took radical trust. And it was a full embodied yes. And it was primarily a heart yes to that journey. And that's like, for all of us, it's an ongoing journey. I just wanted to loop back, if I might, to the point that I think was being made yesterday by Richard about that, and Jim referred to it, about the gathering in Findhorn and the difficulty of getting 300 people to come together into some sort of new story. My sense is that it was also of its time, and it may seem very recent, but it was, I think, about 10 years or more ago. And what I've noticed, even in the last year, last 6 months, is there's more and more and more of a yes to coming together, more and more of a yes to this convergence of science and spirituality into a unitive narrative that converges with universal wisdom teachings. And the reason why I think this is so important is it is based on evidence, but it is also based on a knowingness. There's almost like a recognition that this is the nature of reality. It's not what we've been told in the past, but it's like a deep remembering that this is who we really are. And so it is offering us, it seems to me, authentic hope, an authentic empowering, an authentic courage to go forward together. So that's my sense of this opportunity and this invite and this time for us to depart from an old worldview that is utterly unsustainable, that can't support us in any form of conscious evolution and revolution, and that is just inadequate. It's just based on a false premise of separation. So it's not that reality is not real, but what we see as the appearance of our universe is truly that, but not its most fundamental realms of causation and its grandest expressions of all that we've spoken about today and yesterday in terms of archetypal sentience, intelligence, planetary sentience, angelic, animal. Good Lord. I mean, aren't they our teachers? The trees are our teachers. Your cat's our teacher, Heather. You know, we have so many teachers if we'll only open our minds and our hearts to hear their guidance.
And one of the quotes that Richard shared with us yesterday was a quote from Einstein, where Einstein was quoted as saying, "Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy; it's physics."
Absolutely.
And I mean, that's certainly my worldview, but it's also, there's also a bit of a danger there. There's a bit of this what I'll call the shadow side of ego, that I can have what I want, but you know, if we get to this full body yes that we've been talking about, if it feels to me as if we're operating from that place, then we can find that frequency and we can be in harmony with what's part of the evolutionary impulse of our species. And I'm curious what the three of you have to say about that.
I think we haven't talked a lot today about flying monkeys. That live
and we should
live in us all, you know, and there's a lot of flying monkeys out there. We love, and nothing against monkeys, because I love flying monkeys, or wicked witches and other things, you know, the Darth Vaders. But we should talk about the shadow. And Jim mentioned it in yesterday's program as well, is that, we all have this worldview, and this is my worldview and your worldview and another worldview. And as we move into other frequencies, the worldview, it's kind of like we can look at each other, and if we go up to the next level, and then we're, being kind of in a spaceship looking down, it all looks quite different. So it's kind of vibrationally like that, where you're getting a higher level, and it's not meant to be kind of, ooh, it's a vibrational. You're really getting, it's a perspective. It's a more energetic perspective, and that opens a different conversation or set of possibility or glowing. And even when you start working that world, because of the wonderful thing that we are being human, we do have to come back and recognize that we bring along with us, even when we're in our vibration, our flying monkeys live on, and that's part of the human phenomena. Jean or Jude, sorry, Jude.
I'm happy to take the talking stick on that one and then pass on to Sean. A few things on this, I think. We often talk about paradoxes, paradoxical, and I think in a perception of separation as different things, and you and I and we and all the rest of it, there's innate paradox when we come from that place. When we come from a place of wholeness, then I would suggest that what we can do is see all those different paths as what's called parallax. In other words, we're seeing a different view, but we're seeing it all as part of the whole. And it really softens then all of that, nonsense about I'm right, you're wrong, because you realize that you are seeing inevitably from that place of perception as part of the wholeness. And I think that is where perhaps some of the wisdom can come in, when we soften into that and we let go of that needing to be right, which is often tied into our sense of identity and our ego. So I talk about showing up and getting out of the way. And that's what I mean, showing up and serving, but really leaving the shoes of my ego as folks are coming together to do that. We are truly finding that we are greater than the sum of our parts, but we can only be greater than the sum of our parts if we, I feel, are open to serving the whole and serving the good of the whole, without it having to be my way or the highway, or my way's right and someone else's wrong, or whatever. And I have a sense that gathering at Findhorn was a great learning for many people all those years ago, because I know quite a few of the people who were there. I wasn't. But I know the journey they've continued on to this point, and are much more in many cases now willing to leave that perspectives at the door and come in trust, in love, in compassion and care, to see how can we serve the good of the whole and this evolutionary impulse that's flowing through us.
How about for you, Sean?
Well, getting back a little bit to what you said a second ago, Tom, in regard to Einstein and the manifestation and aligning the frequency of what we want, if you will. I find that in aligning with frequency, there's an element of love and divinity, depending on what divinity you want, how you might define divinity. But also, I'm going to call it the creator. And when I think of the creator and creation, I think of the mother. And certainly my heart, it chokes me up. Certainly my heart broke open when I became a mother. But I bring that up because I feel that is, you don't need to be a mother and you don't need to be a woman, but it's that archetypal energy way before the masculine took over the planet, and the goddess was what was worshipped and identified with, the mother goddess. And it's that energy is what I guess I'm talking about. And so if your frequency can align with that deep love, compassion, and so forth, then depending on what it is, what do I want to manifest? This is where I'm talking about, grace shows up. Grace shows up in healing, perhaps, or not healing. Grace shows in abundance, or perhaps not abundance, but grace shows up in whatever it is that is part of our journey, or Sean's journey, perhaps I should say. So, and I think it also ties back to the softness that Jude is talking about, because that energy is so soft, and it can be so powerful, as opposed to an assertive masculine energy, if you will. And it also, I think, ties back to something I think in Jean's book, The Wizard of Us, where she talks about is love wisdom, or is wisdom love? And maybe it's really the same thing.
It goes up to power as well, doesn't it? Someone once said, when the love of power becomes the power of love. And it is that turning around. The other thing I saw someone mentioned in, I think it was Stan put in the chat, about how about I'm right, you're right. We're all, and that reminds me of a term I tend to use is when we come from the I'm right, you're wrong. Yeah, we sort of try and compromise. And compromise is usually a sort of a real damn, nobody wins, nobody's right, really, compromise. But if we come from a stance pointing out, we're all right in our own ways, in our own perspectives, then perhaps we can come together to serve what I talk about as compromise. So instead of compromise, we can come together to compromise. What is it that we can compromise with each other when we come from that perspective?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing in part in what each of you shared is it's about the intentionality. When we're trying to align with that frequency, it's what's the motivation, what's the intention behind that aligning of the frequency. And when it's in service of ourself, as opposed to being in service of something greater than ourselves, then that manifestation is more likely to show up, or to be realized.
Yeah, and I think part of the intention is very important now, as we're looking at where we are in the world and how Jim's set this program up and kind of what's going on right now, and what are we going to do going forward for humanity of all kinds, the trees and the rocks and the animals and the people. And when your intention is to be open, it's remarkable what comes in. It's that unknowing, or being open to the unknowing, or the open to a new kind of hearing, and be welcoming of the possibilities that are dropped in. And that's really the fun when you start working with different archetypes. What would the sovereign say? Or do I have to is it time to bring in my trickster and Rose and just walk out into something new? So really listening in a different way, and being open to becoming in a different way, rather than having intention of I want to win, or I want to make everybody else believe me. So it's going into grace and possibilities.
I love what you said there, Heather, about all of humanity, including the trees and the animals and everything else, because the term I'm using now, and it was introduced to me by a friend, Michael Lindfield, is that of perceiving ourselves as Gaians, and living in that way that our beloved planetary mother's sentience lives within us, as we live within hers on all of those multidimensional levels. And certainly in my own experience, ever deepening that relationship of love, ever deepening that relationship of trust. And also when I wrote the story of Gaia, realizing just the incredible evolutionary impulse that's flowed through our entire universe, from the first moment, not of a big bang. It wasn't big. We know it wasn't big, but it wasn't a bang, but the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And when I use those terms for people, and really invite people to appreciate that with every breath we take, the universe is breathing through us. and we are part of its breath and its evolutionary breathing. There's something incredibly profoundly embodied in that beauty and that possibility and that potential. And so I would just love to invite everyone to feel, to live as Gaians in that profound relationship with our planetary mother, because that for me has been one of the most beautiful, we talk about frequency and vibration and intention. That has been one of the most beautiful experiences of my onward journey. And the other thing to say now is our group intention. You know, a good friend of ours is Lynn McTaggart, and Lynn has done wonderful work in the sense of group intention and the power of 8. When we come together in circle, and we do so showing up and getting out of the way, we don't bring our egos into that circle, but we come in with intention to be conduits of love, to be conduits of wholeness, to be conduits of service. Then we truly are then greater than the sum of our parts, and we can do that more and more and more and more.
Yeah, I would just like to, as we're spending this time together, because people who tuned in, is we're talking about vibrations and community, and just go back for all of you to trust your inner wisdom and capacities. And where I mentioned discipline, there's so much that we can do to expand our ability to think, our ability to feel, and it can be very simple as really going back to your senses. What do I know? I have a knowing. What do I feel? Do I have a feeling about that? And is it coming in as a feeling, or is it coming in as a knowing? And then maybe you hear something, and are you supposed to be hearing it? What are you hearing? What does it relate to? And you can do some very simple steps around developing and connecting with your inner wisdom, which is incredibly powerful and has a lot of potential. So it doesn't have to get, oh, it's vibrational and we're talking to archetypes. It's really within you, within us. It's tying into the consciousness that we're all connected. And it is really tuning in, going, oh, I do know that. I am aware of that. I do feel that. And as you're working with that, to have, and I'm going to use the word fun with, wow, I could really use Kuan Yin today. I could use her energy. And Kuan Yin is lovely, and she's very strong. Sometimes she sits on a lotus, which is a beautiful white flower that comes out of the swamp. And many of us feel that our lives have recently come out of the swamp, and yet we have that power. And sometimes she does sit on a dragon. So sometimes I have to be very composed and very compassionate to myself and others, and yet ride a dragon to get through the day. So we've been playing around with archetypes and myths, and encourage you. There are books that are out there, and this is certainly, there's more work in this area to expand your own capacities to access different vibrations, but also to develop your own superpowers.
And as we bring Jim back into the conversation, I'll just ask each of you, are there other things that that our audience can be packing for their trip as they begin the departure?
Yeah, thank you. I was just, oh, sorry, June, go ahead.
Thanks. A sense of humor.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun to, you're right, be playful with, because tomorrow our primary theme is initiation. And Juliet Rhodey Brown and Jim are going to tackle that for us. And I think it's fun for maybe our listeners and viewers to think about, who are their superpower? What are their superpowers? So who are the archetypes that I feel aligned with, or that I'd rather be aligned with, or that are my shadow ones? And maybe just get playful with that as we look at initiation tomorrow.
Yeah, and I love the idea of humor, and it was a line from a movie. So what did we learn, Dorothy, as you're coming out of the body of the whale, how to get learning out of these times?
Well, good. Well, thank you all for this very, very powerful presentation. I'd like to open up for deeper dialogue one aspect that you all have kind of mentioned but not explored very deeply, and that is the utility of cross-species communication. Because I think that if there's one aspect of this cosmological upgrading in human consciousness, we're not only moving from the individual to, Buddha as Sangha, that the next Buddha will be a community. But I think part of the transformation, the revolution that you're talking about, Jude, in our evolutionary development is the understanding that humanity's intelligence, way of perceiving, is part of a very intricate mosaic of other species communications, intelligences, and capacities. And I raise this because, as you all know, I'm working on the UFO issue in Washington to ensure passage of a critical piece of legislation, and more broadly to awaken globally the awareness that we are not alone. And I think that there's two sides to that coin. Not only are we not alone with the UFOs, extraterrestrial, we're not alone with other species terrestrially. And in fact, there are many observers who believe that there's a connection between our capacity to communicate specifically with trees that is linked to our capacity to communicate with extraterrestrials from other parts of the galaxy and beyond, and in other dimensions. So Heather Ash, I was fascinated when you were saying, you've expanded from being a high-powered corporate executive to talking to your cat and guinea pigs, but that may be the most important evolutionary leap of our time. And so I just would love the two of you, and maybe you too, Sean, just to speak to the importance of just taking the time to communicate with species that are around us, because that may be the key to the broader cosmological conversation that humanity is about ready to have as it enters its ET moment.
Thank you. I love that question. And I'll just put it in three areas and then turn it over to Jude. One is talking to animals. We all can be taught to talk to animals, to talk to Fluffy and whomever. It is a set of skills. It is a discipline. It's something that people can be trained to do. On that note, they're everywhere. So you really can talk to your cat and your dog and you're part of your family who's with you at home. And we also can learn from the animals. If you learn from the elephants, if you learn from nature, they're aware of when a storm is coming. They're aware of a full moon. They're aware that the climate is changing. There's so many stories around that. They're aware of what's happening in the water. And the more that we start hearing from them, not just, oh, we're humans observing them, but asking them, what do you know? What are you learning? What's happening to the bacteria? What's happening to the algae? They're very happy to tell you. And they tell you, and it's not, oh, we have to teach them how to speak English. Through telepathy, you actually can have conversations. Now, that is, again, something that people are interested in. It's a phenomenal field. Also, as Jude mentioned, we have both walked through multiple worlds since birth. So I've always lived my life this way. You can talk to trees. You can talk to the earth. The same thing. If you're listening, I remember I was up at Kripalu and I was out there and it was so beautiful. And I was talking to the trees and say, oh, it must be lovely living here. And they went, it was kind of like Wizard of Oz. They're like grumpy trees going, no, there's a highway right behind us and it's smoggy. Going, what? And I looked and there was a highway right behind them. And so, again, I've never known anything else, so I can say these stories, but you can listen. And nature, I mean, look at nature, look at Mother Nature now. The old commercial, she's not happy. And so she's turning and she's churning and things are slushing around. So it's important to listen to her, either to observe her or actually ask her. So for those of us who go, oh, it's literal, but some of it's just observation, and the other is UFOs. And again, I think that is another program of what we can learn. When we get into different vibrations, there are different energies in that we can tap into. And then there also are different life forces that we can tap into. And you can do it in again, different ways. And I know that's part of the work you're doing. So it's a big conversation.
Yeah.
And I would encourage everyone to start, with the fluffy ones or otherwise at home.
Thank you, Jude.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Jim. I'll just go back to basics on this emergent understanding that mind and consciousness aren't what we have. They are literally what we in the whole world are. So everything in existence are microcosms, mesocosms, whatever level, whatever scale of that universal and multidimensional intelligence and evolutionary impulse. So being able to converse, and it's not, it's not an English language symposium. It is more that felt sense, that knowing sense that Heather was relating to, of communication. And for me, it is all our relatives, as the indigenous traditions tell us. It is animals, and it's trees, and it's rocks, and it's water, and it's the whole of Gaia, and the whole of our solar family, and it's angels, as Sean related to, and it's ancestors. My mum used to say, I'll talk to anybody. And she had no idea just how many folks I was talking with. And that, like Heather, has been an ongoing journey. And I think the key here is not to talk to, but to hear and listen, because we are the students. We are not the teachers. We are the students. And the more we're able to let go that illusory sense of control and trust and be humble. I don't mean be diminished. I just realize what we don't know. We've been very good at thinking what we do know. So we're now entering a whole, it seems to me, evolutionary adventure of consciousness, and turning up with that openness of mind and heart is vital. And our beloved Gaia and all her children are just amazing teachers. I write about having a meditation with a slime mold in the story of Gaia. And I think it was a dog's vomit slime mold. Marvelous being, absolutely marvelous being. So I encourage the widest possible openness to these communications and this guidance and learning.
Yeah, we'll take that image with us, Jude.
I have to tell you, Jim, when I wrote the story, I literally fell in love with slime molds. And the reason is they have no nervous system. They don't have a brain. But if you actually lay a slime mold on a piece of glass or something, and you put oat flakes around that piece of glass, and they love oat flakes in laboratories, they will find that food in incredible optimum time. And the original researchers did this with oat flakes and found this incredible efficiency of slime molds. But then what they did is those oat flakes weren't scattered at random. They actually took the metropolitan transport system of Tokyo and the major hubs, and they put them down as the oat flakes. And the slime molds found the best, most efficient network in a couple of hours that the Tokyo engineers and supercomputers had taken something like 10 years to do.
Amazing.
I love the slime molds.
You rest your case.
I rest my case, my lord.
John, what is your view on this matter?
Well, I'll be brief here. A couple different things. Jude mentioned the word humble, and I agree. For many years, I have thought, humanity has been so arrogant to not research the gifts of our plant and animal world. Right? I mean, so arrogant. And then as we do study, we are astounded by the gifts we're discovering. And I have found in my own life, again, not to overuse the word frequency, when I go to somebody's house or their dog and their cat run over and people are like, oh, they like you. And I think it's just a frequency thing, they're curious and I'm open or whatever it happens to be. And maybe that's a first place to start in a relationship with animals. And then in terms of extraterrestrials, the whole 80s, the 1980s, I was having so many lucid dreams, so many visitations, so many experiences. And when I say lucid, I could tell you all of them now, which I really didn't share with too many people at the time. They go, okay, Sean's, formally off the planet now. And I would say that my experience was with these incredible beings, beneficent beings, loving beings. The energy around them was just so compelling and attractive. And so I've always been hoping that our world would know that they were here in my lifetime. And so thank you, Jim, for the work you're doing, because this is, I feel, perhaps the biggest truly transformational consciousness shift that will happen certainly in my lifetime when we get to the fact that, yeah, we're not here by ourselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Tom, do you want to make any comment and then tee us up for tomorrow?
Yeah, I can't thank Heather and Jude enough for being with us today and the conversation that we had. Just a beautiful way of seeing where is humanity today. We are departing. We're heading on this hero and heroine's journey, whether we like it or not. There's the evolutionary impulse that's taking us there. It was unexpected but delightful to have us wander into this conversation around all of the resources we have around us, trees, animals, rocks, etc. As we're packing for this journey, we need all the resources we can gather. And I could go on for days talking about my experiences with animals as totems, as resources, and me navigating my own personal life. But I'll leave that for another time. Tomorrow we'll be in the belly of the whale, and delighted to have you with us tomorrow, Jim, and Juliet Rhodey Brown with us, and for me to have my companion Sean with this week and the journey and the conversation tomorrow. I feel like we've set up our audience well with Richard yesterday and the two of you today to go into the belly of the whale. So it's been a wonderful conversation so far this week, and continuing the exploration will be fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And looking forward to the dialogue tomorrow and then Thursday and Friday. So thank you so much, Tom and Heather and Jude for your comments, and also Sean for your assistance to Tom. That'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom invite. And then we'll see you all again tomorrow for a continuation of this most important conversation about what conscious leadership means in our very precarious and potentiated world. Thanks so much. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.